I'm Jenna Morton.
And I'm Tosh Taylor. And on today's show, we have a life and leadership coach. We have Tracey MacDonald with us, and Tracey has brought us in a couple copies of her book, which we'll get into in just a bit. But first, Tracey, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here today.
I'm very excited too
As you
because
can tell.
we tend to invite guests on who are like, we really need the help of this person. So we're going to come talk to them for a while because maybe you need their help too. So let's start with that. What exactly is it that you help people with?
Mindset, I would say, would be the biggest piece. That and the emotions as well. I mean, especially this time of year, emotions can be quite heavy. And so mostly what I work on with people is to help people see things from a different perspective. Again, empty, I always say, brain dump, empty those emotions so that, again, they can take their life to that next level.
Okay. Now let's back up just a bit and let's talk about you. How did you end up in this career?
You know what, I'm going to say it was more like a calling, really. I have been always passionate about personal growth. Even as a little girl, you know, I had that recording of my parents saying, I just want everybody to be happy, you know, which was a great intention for a little girl, but you can just imagine how that even created its own you know, weight of it, right?
Yeah.
So that also led me to do my own inner work as well. You know, the people pleasing, the conflict avoiding, the fear of saying no even comes from that. But I would say one of the things that I was always known for, even within my friends, was creating trust and safety. You know, when someone came to me to share, it was like I was known for the vault. My friend Missy would always say, "You wear the best don't tell t-shirt." And so I kept hearing, you should be a coach, you should be a coach. And actually, my husband had an international transfer to Florida. He was working down there at the time, and I was helping one of his colleagues' wife. You know, she was going through some things, and his colleague came to me, he said, "You should be a coach." I'm like, yeah, I heard that so many times, and then I finally, you know, it was such a strong pull, I finally, you know, went with it and did the training, and so here I am today. Love it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's definitely a calling then. When everybody keeps telling you, you know, there's got to be something, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's amazing. And that's, I agree with that, is what is people, you know, what are you known for? What makes you light up when you're doing it or lose track of time? I think that's something special to pay attention to.
I love that turn of phrase about that. Like, when do you just lose track of time? Like, that's how you narrow down what it is that you really are passionate about.
Absolutely. I mean, when you lose track of time, I talk a lot about energy. To me, that's like one of the highest vibrations, is when you lose track of time. Miley Csikszentmihalyi, he is an author, I think, at Positive Psychology. And one of the things he turned was the statement of flow. And he says, when you have so much attention onto something that you're doing, that pure focus, I think we have only about 120 bits of information we can process at one time. So let's say, you know, I probably can't process more than 2 people are talking. So when you're in that state of flow, you're concentrating solely on what you're doing. And you're that enjoyment of it, that you lose track of time, that you don't even recognize you're hungry. And it's kind of like an artist, for example. You know, you can't wait to get it out on the canvas. It's pure creation. Versus when we're in a lower vibration, think of, you know, those lower one, inner critic, right? The doubts of, will this sell? Will this, you know, all the doubts come in. You're not in that creative space. You're in a different vibration even within that.
Sounds about where I'm at right now.
I feel like you said, like this time of year especially, people put so much expectation on themselves starting a new year that very quickly, if you don't meet that expectation you set for yourself, so let's just start there. Maybe you can give yourself some, you know, leeway. But what can you say to people who are feeling that right now? Like, whether it's because of the time of year or just something else in their life that they're like, oh, I am stuck.
Stuck. That is the number one word. I always say use stuck as a signal, you know, to recognize, okay, something needs to change. And a lot of people, what they do is they keep doing the same behaviors that leads them to staying in that stuckness versus like, hey, I'm feeling stuck. What do I need to be doing differently in order to move forward? And I think that's the big piece, is to recognize, how do you play into that behavior that keeps you running around on that, I say, the treadmill, right? The hamster wheel, the rumination. I mean, a lot of times at the base of it, it's a behavior that needs to change because those behaviors have served us in the past, and now they're showing up in a different situation that keeps you in that feeling of stuck. So I would say the big thing is to recognize, okay, I'm feeling stuck. Recognizing even what is the emotion that may be showing up with that. I also like to think of emotions kind of like, here would be a metaphor, right? So let's say I had a sandwich, a tuna fish. I love this metaphor, I heard it before. And I threw it in the garbage. Well, initially it doesn't really smell, okay? But if I leave it there for a week, let's say, and I don't deal with it, I'm just gonna put Lysol in it. I'm gonna keep the cover there, right? And let's say now 2 or 3 weeks go by. People come in and they can start smelling the garbage, right? So meaning what you're emanating, what you're putting out there. So that needs to be emptied. But what most people do is they shove it down. A lot of times they cope, they tolerate, they even numb out. That's where the scrolling of the Facebook, where we completely, versus, okay, what do I need to do to empty? Where do I need to recognize my responsibility, and how can I choose to do something different? Otherwise, we tend to stay victim to our circumstances. That would be I'd say the biggest thing I hear from people is, I feel lighter after I talk to you, which makes sense because emotions can be heavy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are kind of at a state where, we hang out mostly with entrepreneurs, so it's kind of, like I'm trying to think of all of our friends, but yeah, everybody is an entrepreneur that we hang out with. But you get in that imposter syndrome state.
Yep. And
I find, especially with social media, I'm scrolling because I'm going, okay, I have to come up with a reel, or I have to come up with a post or whatever. So that's my excuse, is I'm looking for things to use on my socials.
I like that you recognize that.
Oh, yes. Excuse. one step at a time. So it's, again, it is that hamster wheel, right? That we're constantly in a place of, I don't know, not being good enough. The imposter syndrome is harsh.
I wrote a chapter about it. I know all about it. Like that, good enough, not good enough, even with public speaking, like, oh my goodness. Like when I first started, literally in there, I'm talking about my inner critic, and it was the message, yeah, you're not enough. And literally my heart would just be racing. I could hardly swallow. But I mean, look at where I am here today and speaking, and I'm so comfortable with it. But again, that comes with practice. I think it's to recognize, okay, here's where I am. Okay, so what do I need to do and keep moving forward? What's the action piece, knowing that, okay, practice. This is normal where I am. Practice is what's going to get me there. Even within that, instead of fighting against it, I learned to understand that inner critic, because it always has a positive intent for us, most times to keep us not experiencing certain emotions. It wants us to be comfortable. So even with understanding that, for example, with public speaking, I'm like, okay, I know my heart's going to race, right? I'm not going to fight against that. So then I even started running and then learning how to speak, knowing that my heart was going to race, right? So it was like little things, just little shifts. That's why I call it gift of shift. My colleague and I, Ann Papiotti, were the one who wrote it. It's those little shifts in life that make such a big difference. But the first thing is you need to take responsibility of, okay, where I am, even if it's, involving relationships, what's your 2%? So that, again, it allows you to make different choices for yourself.
I love that you talk about the little shifts.
Yes.
And not trying to be like, oh, I want this whole other type of lifestyle, and so I need to do 5 different resolutions at the start of the year.
Right.
No, try one little thing, get that, build on it. I think is a much more sustainable way to get to those goals. But we have to realize they don't just happen because it's a new year.
bingo, because you just said that people put expectations on themselves. And as you said, I mean, I used to go to the gym and be like, okay, February, it will be back to normal, right? Because you know that, because people put these big goals, but nothing within them changed. They start trying to, I need to do this and put pressure on themselves, but then they go back to their own behavioral style because they haven't really connected to what they're really trying to shift within them. And again, creating those little habits that brings them big time results. I mean, just even thinking of an airplane. If an airplane did a 2% shift, it doesn't even land in the same direction, And so it's to think of that in your mind is like, you may not think it's a big deal. As you said, it's a little thing. Drink more water, right? It's a little thing, but it can make such an impact in your life. Yeah.
Do you find when you decided to get into coaching, did it take a lot of work for you to train yourself to start thinking this way?
You know what, again, I've been a personal growth junkie since my early 20s.
Okay, yeah.
So I say it's always about taking it to the next level. I don't think there's a place that you're like, okay, I'm here. Right? I think growth, we're meant for expansion. And it's like, okay, how do I keep taking it to the next level? So yeah, I say mindset is something I continually to work on. I consider it like a flower garden. I think I heard that from Anthony Robbins. You have this beautiful flower garden and there's weeds that pop up in that. So you're not going to be like positive and say, oh, there's no weeds, there's no weeds, there's no weeds, right? You got to be realistic and say, okay, there's weeds in there. How do I get it out, maintain, and look, keep things beautiful. I think that's the biggest thing. Otherwise, if we tend to avoid it, then it becomes overgrown, and then again, it takes way more work than to maintain. You're talking about entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I coach a lot of entrepreneurs, and a big thing that I do is like brain dumping. It gets quite, a lot of ideas, and you're in tug of war when there's two parts of you are at, and they need that space, right? You need that space to get clear, but also, as I was saying about raising your vibration, it's a brain thing as well. If you don't give yourself a chance to renew that part of the brain instead of scrolling, which doesn't create renewal, going for a walk in nature, or gives yourself a chance to have space, or pet your dog or your cat or something that creates renewal within you.
Just walk in nature.
I know.
Take
it's
your
like she's
dog.
talking to me.
Look, she made that. She made that reference.
You clearly know me very well.
You're saying, and I can picture Tosh doing these things.
Yeah.
Yes, you already know. Do
Right?
yes.
But
Well, it's
busy.
funny. Yeah.
But you're busy, right?
Yeah, I'm very busy, and I do a lot of interviewing, and you, I'm sure, probably get this too. Before the interview, I will dread it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go. I don't want to be there. And then every time I leave, I feel so good.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I have, this giant burst event. It's like its own cortisol or whatever. And but yeah, the thought of literally doing anything these days, and I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna
And
do
it's not
it.
Bingo.
the act of doing it necessarily. It's all the like, oh, I have to get dressed. I have to leave the house. Oh, I don't like my clothes. I don't like this thing that happened on my face this morning. Oh, I left without time to. It's all that mental
Negative.
Yeah, exactly. All those things. But yes, once you go and do it, you're like, oh yeah, all right, now I'm ready to tackle the next thing.
I think that's a big thing that you just said, because you made the decision, you made the commitment to be here, and you recognize a lot of times that motivation isn't the starting point. Motivation tends to be the result, because when you're here, as you said, now you've built momentum, now you're ready to, but just to recognize, as you said, there's a lot of steps within that, and sometimes you don't feel like it, and a lot of people create that as a full stop versus, hey, you know what, sometimes I need to make a different decision, or I need to keep moving, in order to create that momentum that makes me do things that I really, really want in life. Yeah.
How do you help people go back to something like that and forgive themselves for getting stopped for doing something? Because I feel like I'm probably not the only one who has had that, like, oh yeah, I had this momentum, I was doing great, something stopped me.
Yep.
And then, oh, well, I stopped.
Yes.
Why should I go back to it? Giving yourself that permission to go back and start again and not see it as a failure.
Oh, totally. It's looking at it non-judgmentally. That's the biggest thing. And one of them is to go into, okay, what made me decide differently? What made me say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore? And recognizing, connecting back to, was it something that you really want to do in the first place? Was it a should? You know, there's so much even energy into the things that we choose every day. How do you connect to what's most important? To me, it's really about creating that alignment, creating what's most important, and getting really clear on that. I think that's what really creates us to shine, you know, at our full capabilities.
So if you had mentioned earlier that the first step is recognizing.
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Okay.
Absolutely.
So what comes after that? What would be step 2?
Doing the inner work. So even just to recognizing some of the behavioral patterns that may be showing up. The thoughts. You know, even when we all have that inner critic, it just shows up differently for everybody. You know, as you said, some it's fear of failure, some it's, you know, not being able to say no. But a big thing is to even recognize when you're going into autopilot, when you're making decisions based on that voice versus to what you really want. You can be aware of it, but because I've decided something different and connected to what I value and who I truly am, I'm still going to make those decisions based on that. Does that make sense how I'm explaining?
It does. It sounds very much as you're saying it. I'm like, you know, the good, successful businesses of the world do that, right? They have a mission, they have a vision, they have a brand statement that if they're working properly, everything they do goes back to, does this fulfill our mission? Does this fulfill our values?
Yes.
Does this align? And I don't often hear people doing it for themselves. I hear companies talking that way, but as you're saying it, I'm like, yeah, we all need that brand statement, that mission statement to go back to and have that conversation with ourselves.
Totally, and it comes back to what do we value as well, and how do we back that up with our choices? Hence as the little shifts, a lot of times we just go into autopilot and keep choosing the same thing over and over. They say what, up to 80% of people's thoughts are negative. Up to 95% are the same thoughts they had the day before. That's why I always say, okay, it's time to wake up. Like that's that's my tagline, wake up and shift into a whole new vibe. It's becoming aware, what are your behavioral patterns that, you know, most times it's led you to a certain area in your life. And a lot of times that can be successful. But then if you're stuck, then it's like, what's the next thing? What's the new pattern? What's something you have to do differently to get you to that next phase, basically, or that next level in your life.
What do you find when working with your clients?
Yeah.
Is there a common thing that people have to step over to get to that next phase? Does it seem similar in most people?
I would say, you know, basically it comes down to emotions. A lot of people don't recognize how their thoughts create their feelings create their actions, and their actions create the results. A lot of times people don't recognize how they are making their decisions every day on how they are feeling. For example, so many people make decisions through guilt, right? What's going to make me feel less guilty versus, you know, if they're in a peaceful state, how do they decide differently? So I'd say the common theme is recognizing the emotional component, and of course, you know, recognizing when that little voice in our head can, you know, really get in the way to what we're wanting in our life. I would say those are the two biggest themes that would show up in my practice.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think it is. It's so important to figure out, like you said, how to listen to that voice, because you mentioned before, a lot of times it's coming from a place of yourself trying to protect something about your emotions.
Yeah.
And how do you learn what those, you know, what it is that's really going on.
Yes.
And to recognize our inner world is a direct reflection of what we're seeing on the outer world. Like that is, I can't stress that enough. Like your outer world, use it as a mirror. Like what is being reflected back to you? And if you do the inner work, it's amazing how that changes everything on how you even see things on the outside. There's such a direct connection with that.
I know I hear a lot of people, I think we all see a lot of people talk, that their first step was gratitude. Realizing what I had, be thankful for what I have, and then suddenly there becomes this shift in their life. And I work hard for that. But it's like, okay, before I go to bed tonight, I'm going to say 3 things that I'm grateful for the day. And most nights I get into bed and I'm like, I'm out.
Right.
I don't even get a chance.
Maybe you start doing that in the morning.
I mean,
how about that for your little shift?
Better time of day. my little shift.
Your little shift, do it in the morning. Yeah, I mean, gratitude, absolutely, you're right, that is a little shift because it's a different vibration. And it's amazing how we chase. I mean, if you can't be thankful even for what's in your life now, what makes you think you're going to be thankful and grateful? Because people are constantly, life is contrast. Like, if we really look at that, life is contrast. You know, there's night, day, north, south, up, down. Life is contrast. So you're continually going to be having contrast in your life, which then again keeps you in certain areas of your life are stuck, where you also need to birth new ideas and new creative ways, but recognizing you're always going to be wanting to chase the next thing. So how do you stop and enjoy where you are today? I mean, so many people would be wishing right now that they were healthy, right? And you have that. So many people would be wishing that they had a relationship. So many people, I mean, no matter what's showing up in our life, there's always something to be grateful for. I love that quote. It's in my book about, I woke up this morning and I opened 2 gifts. It was my eyes, and sometimes it's just to recognize that, okay, what can I choose to be grateful for? But to connect to the emotional component of that, because if you're just running it off, yeah, I should be grateful, I'm grateful, I'm grateful, you don't feel it. It doesn't really ring true within your being.
Yeah, it makes me think of it like a kid doing their homework, like, yeah, I'm gonna write these 5 lines because I'm told I have to write them, but you're not thinking about them, you're not feeling them, you're not invested in what you're doing.
Bingo. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about the book. You said the book came out in 2020. And this is The Gift of Shift. So discovering the key within to unlock your best life. So this is probably going to go with me everywhere.
Yes. So my colleague Ann Papiotti and I mean, we're both life coaches. So it's 12 common themes, 12 inspirational our own stories that inspire mindset shift. Each story has a different theme with coaching questions after each story so that people can write out their own shift within that. Most of us, or everybody's experienced grief in our life. I mean, right now, you were saying about a common theme, grief is a huge one. Loss of connection is a big one right now. There's a chapter on that. Betrayal, forgiveness, hope, the inner critic. So they're all common themes we experience in our life. We experience them different, but it helps us to recognize the commonality, but also where can we do our shifts. So it helps us keep moving forward, or remembering a strength, that's something we've been through. So again, we can take that learning forward. Yeah.
I want to keep talking, but Charles is telling me I can't. So so we have to wrap up the show, but I'm glad that I at least got the question about the book out there. Where can people find it is the second most important question.
Chapters. You can find it at Chapters. You can find it on Amazon. It's in line if you're in the States, Barnes & Noble. Mostly any online platform you can find it.
Fantastic. And where can people find more about you and follow what you're doing, or get in touch if they're interested in your work?
Beautiful. Tracey Mac Coaching is usually, you can pop on my website, Tracey Mac Coaching, even on Facebook or Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, so all the major social media.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us. And I know that Tosh is just going to keep talking for like hours after we finish this recording. So I'm sure we'll come back to this topic again sometime. Thank you all for listening and watching, and we'll be back again next week.